Would Angela Rayner take over? That is my question for tonight's Wealth Rant special. What would happen? How would it go? There is, of course, huge amounts of speculation at the moment because Starmer has proved himself so uniquely hopeless as a politician and as the Prime Minister. So many people, of course, thinking, is he going to be gone this week, next week? Is the Gorton and Denton by-election going to finally be enough for people to push him out? Or is the whole problems and issues he's going through at the moment with some of his people he's decided to hire going to be the finishing point for him? So whichever it is, the question is, when he goes, who's going to replace him? And there are lots of people kicking around ideas about who they think it might be. And I figured that might be quite an interesting little discussion for us to get into this evening. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now, if you like my work, make sure you're following me. Check out my videos on any of the main platforms, whichever you happen to be watching on right now. You can also, if you want to check my profile, you find a link. The link takes you to something called the Wealth Reset. The Wealth Reset is part of what I'm doing on the platforms, which is to help people find their path through life. That sounds very grand, but it's about balancing your money in, your money out, and what it is that you're doing it all for. Because I kind of by accident stumbled on my route roughly 30 years ago, but I'd spent several years broke doing terrible jobs before then. And for the last 30 years, I've done work I love. I run a number of businesses. I have a good solid income. I've got a great growing social media series of platforms. If you want to know how I've done that, then get yourself into the Wealth Reset. It's on any of my profiles. It's free. You can find out more about it. You can also find my Wealth Formula book, which you can buy. That's the only thing I'm selling today. Wealth Reset is free. But let's get into this topic. So if Starmer falls, what will happen if Rayner takes over? So the immediate question, if Starmer stepped down and Angela Rayner became Prime Minister, what happens? Well, you wouldn't get just a personality swap. So you would trigger the leadership contest inside Labour. You would get a reset of cabinet, of course, because she'd want to sack anybody that she thought was loyal to him. And you'd get a market reaction, I'm going to say within hours, but possibly even quicker. Here's the interesting thing. When Andy Burnham, end of last year, mentions we've got to stop being, as the Labour government, we've got to be so desperate hanging on whatever the markets think, there was, for a few hours, a bit of a wobble with the interest rates. And it is worth pointing out, when Labour came in July 24, our ability to borrow money got more expensive, simply when Labour came in. And so there's an interesting thing. What would happen now with our situation considerably worse after a year and a half of the socialists in number 10? What would happen if we changed MPs or PMs at this stage? It is absolutely true. Politics moves fast, markets move faster. So would there be calm transition or would there be panic? Well, let's separate the rhetoric from what people think could happen. So markets care about three things: fiscal discipline, policy stability, and the credibility of the chancellor. You can see already why Labour's made such a mess of it, can't you? So Labour winning in 24, there was that short-term volatility, which is what I was just talking about. Now, that's really normal after the change of government. Bond markets didn't collapse. Sterling didn't crash. There was none of the absolute disaster of the 2022 mess under Liz Truss. And that's because markets look at policy signals, not party labels alone. But, and there's a big but, Rayner is perceived as being further left than Starmer. That we know. If you are a normal working person, if you run businesses like I do, if you are a high taxpayer, as I am, you will look at Starmer and think this is a terrible socialist, communist, whinging lefty government. But if you're in the Labour Party, Starmer is nowhere near left enough. Angela Rayner is considered soft left. And if she finds herself in the top job, then whilst Labour are going to be a lot happier, markets not so much, because Rayner is, of course, further left than Starmer. She is more aligned with Labour's traditional wing. And that alone could trigger short-term gilt and currency volatility. Now, I don't think it necessarily be meltdown, but we are absolutely at risk of heightened pricing, risk pricing. When the markets look at a government like the one we have at the moment, and you can see it's happened, they instantly think, okay, what are our risks? What are our dangers? That is likely to happen if someone more left than Starmer kicks in. So we're looking at bond yields spiking temporarily and investors reassessing fiscal direction. Now, there's an interesting thing because with politics, of course, it's all about optics. It's all about appearance. It's all about saying and doing the right thing. And Rayner has difficulties with HMRC because she has not managed her situation very well. Now, I'm not making any claims on what she has or hasn't done. I have my own views. I have my own views about HMRC, and I have my own views about arranging your affairs to minimize your tax hit. But none of that matters in the court of public perception, because whether it is resolved or legally compliant, the political framing matters. Because we would be moving to a situation with a prime minister who is under tax scrutiny. That's a risk of credibility or zero credibility. It's an obvious attack line for the opposition. And it's absolutely going to be everywhere in the media. Markets do not like distraction and instability. This is perception again, but markets don't like that. And that perception will feed the volatility. Again, this doesn't automatically mean economic collapse simply because we put Rayner as Prime Minister, but it does weaken her authority, the government's authority, and the UK as a whole. And we then have a second and associated problem, which is the Chancellor problem. Because if Starmer falls, does Rachel Reeves survive? Almost certainly not. The two jobs are linked very, very closely. It's often noted that prime ministers do the politics, they do the people, they do the gathering, they do the follow me, I'm in charge, I have the backing. Now, Rayner, whether you like her politics or not, likely has that considerably more than Starmer has currently. It's difficult to find people speaking positively about Starmer. There are people who say, I think he's decent, or people who say, I think he's got his heart in the right place. Oh, bless, God loves a trier. But that's in conjunction with all of his many, many failures. There are very few people who go, oh no, Starmer really commands interest and respect. Rayner doesn't have that situation. So a lot of people within the Labour Party quite like Angela. She's got a good backstory. She's considerably more interesting to listen to. She's got far more force of character and charisma than Starmer has, but she does have this HMRC thing. So let's assume that she gets in. What happens to Rachel Reeves? Well, Rachel goes because if nothing else, Angela's going to move her out. Of course she will, because it's just too much of a risk to be tied to the old guard. So who are the possible replacements? Well, this is where I'm going to try and keep a straight face. We've got David Lammy. Whatever you think of the guy, he's been around a while, strong political operator, but not exactly flying when it comes to direct finance backgrounds, is he? What about Pat McFadden? Very experienced operator, probably closer to the Treasury discipline wing. So he might be someone of interest to Angela. Yvette Cooper, senior, very experienced, zero experience in finance. But then again, some people might cynically say, not exactly done Rachel any good, has it, with her amazing experience? None of these are former central bankers. None of these are market technocrats. And that matters because markets respond well to what we might perceive as fiscal hawks. What they don't like is bad perception of ideological uncertainty. So that is the risk that Rayner faces and Labour faces. Now, is Rayner being more left-wing automatically bad for markets? Well, no, not automatically. It's not great, but it's not an automatically bad thing. Investors care about spending plans, tax plans, borrowing levels, and relationships with the Bank of England. Now, we know that after promising not to raise taxes, of course, Starmer and Reeves did raise taxes twice. After saying they won't come back for more money, they came back for more money. They've literally hosed everybody with tax raises. Rayner is likely to go for more tax raises. So we are likely to shift the rhetoric left, but retain the Treasury orthodoxy. Is she going to pivot towards stronger redistribution? Probably. More union alignment? Probably. She thinks it's done a great thing. More public spending? Again, yes. So the reaction's likely to depend on the first budget. So if they set fiscal rules and the fiscal rules remain intact, volatility is likely to fade. If borrowing expands without credible growth strategy, yields will rise sharply. And this is the problem. Labour came in without a plan. They did it all on a wish and a prayer. Rayner herself was going on and on about it was great to get rid of all the horrible private landlords because we're going to build 1.5 million homes. That's not really lasted very well for her, has it? And so we end up in a situation with none of this going the way it should go. What about the experience? So there's a common criticism of the current front bench. They don't have, I was going to say business experience. They don't have business experience. Most of them don't have normal job experience. It's difficult to imagine any of them doing the kind of job that you or I might have done where we can't stand the boss, we have to deal with awful customers. But markets don't care so much about the CVs. Remember, they're interested in predictability. They're interested in competence. They're interested in internal discipline. And when you think about those three things, predictability, competence, and internal discipline, you can see why the first year and a half of Labour has been an utter shit show. It's been utterly unpredictable, total incompetence, and no discipline whatsoever. See, a government can lack corporate backgrounds. It might irritate you or I, but it couldn't be enough to reassure the markets. The bigger risk that Labour has is ideological fracture inside the party. And if Rayner's leadership emboldens the party's left wing, markets will price in higher future spending. So will there be a meltdown? Serious meltdown? Well, probably not. But there's likely to be a short-term shock. We would be looking at sterling volatility, gilt yield spikes. We'd be looking at bank share fluctuations, and we'd be looking at the people like me, the media narrative of instability. But unless fiscal policy radically shifts, we don't automatically see system collapse. It's all down to chaos or calm, not so much possibilities. So, as we start to wrap this up, what is the political reality? Rayner is more popular internally in parts of the party. She absolutely, I suspect, would energise Labour members. We have seen nothing but Labour supporters, voters going, that's it, he's had too many chances. Prime Minister is a mix of both credibility and popularity. If Starmer had been credible, if he had done what he should have been doing all the way, it probably wouldn't matter that he appears to not care about anything. His difficulty is no charisma and no credibility. Now, Boris Johnson, whatever you think of the guy, I think he was an absolute shambles, and I think he was an insult to the office of Prime Minister, a noble office that has been there for hundreds of years. I think he basically took the piss. He had bags of personality, and among the Tory faithful, very popular. Unfortunately, credibility plummeted. When you think about Blair and Brown, very interesting. Blair, of course, had huge amounts of popularity and initially, at least, high degrees of credibility, possibly why he was very successful for a long term. When Brown came in, Brown, zero popularity. Not really, but they tried to do it on the credibility. He's not about spin, he's about substance. Turned out he was about neither. Now, the difficulty we've got at the moment is we've got a zero credibility and a zero popularity Prime Minister. Rayner could come in, could do well with popularity. The credibility is the issue, and she would rely on a strong chancellor in order to make the two of them work. I don't know whether she can do that. I don't know whether they've got the people they've got there. The real question is who becomes chancellor and what do they say and do in week one? And that single speech would determine market direction more than anything else. Folks, that is my live this evening, my wealth rant special. Indeed, David, just on the end of this, just before I close this up, if Rayner becomes PM, we're finished. How can who's being investigated for tax evasion become PM? Indeed, it was what I was talking about right at the beginning of this wealth rant this evening. Folks, lovely to see you here. Do check out, if you are interested to know a little bit more about it, in my profile you find my link to the wealth formula. It's free. You can also pick up my wealth formula book. That isn't free, but it gives you the background to my philosophy, my theory, all about how to make money, save money, and live the life you want. Thank you for being here. See you next time.